Hey guys, Boris here, day number 26 of my 30-day video challenge. It's Friday. The weather is pretty good, although there's a little bit of rain that was just dripping down. So hopefully it stays pretty rain-free for tonight and the weekend. Hope everybody had a great week. This is essentially the last couple of days of July, which means it's the last couple of days of our 30-day challenge. It's just unbelievable how fast time flies. Like it's weird that a month is already gone. 30% of the quarter is already gone, and yeah, I guess that's what happens with life, and it's kind of weird. But my plans for this weekend is to kind of sit down and review the month, and I mentioned in a previous video kind of what I did well, what I didn't do well, what I could have improved on. Really look at where I spend my time and just try to analyze and be critical on myself to see how we can do a little better in the next month. And that's just personal and business as well. So I like to do that and just kind of break it down. We'll go to a coffee shop, grab a coffee, and just really write down everything that's on my mind. What I wanted to talk about today is actually share with you guys. So one of the things I've been doing lately, and I'm sure most of you have as well, is you've allocated a lot more time, especially when driving or walking, to podcasts. And podcasts are pretty sweet because it kind of allows you to keep busy while you're driving rather than listening to music. And I'm a big fan of music, love it, but I just find it to maybe not be as fulfilling at times. And if you're going on a long drive, podcasts are really awesome, especially if you're alone in the car. Most of you have probably heard of some of these, but what I wanted to talk about was maybe bring up a couple of podcasts that I'm a big fan of and I'd recommend, especially if you're thinking of maybe jumping into getting yourself on that mindset of business and getting a company off the ground, or getting that idea that's been on the back of your mind forward. These would be pretty cool. So the first one, which I think is a podcast for everybody, and everybody should be tuning in to it. It's really simple and clean conversations between founders of really successful businesses with essentially the interviewee, and it's called How I Built This. And How I Built This is super addicting. Once you listen to one or two episodes, you're going to want to continue to kind of tune in. And the interviewee's name is Guy Raz, and he interviews some of the biggest companies and their founders, from Chipotle to Lululemon, to Panera Bread, to Stitch Fix, you name it. Like, it's super awesome, and the conversations are just very basic. And he really goes back to like the early days and trying to understand what they were like growing up, how the idea came to life. And it's just like a nice, not too businessy, but just you really get a feel for the story, which is always cool. And obviously these are companies that we use on a daily basis, so it's really nice to see, and it will give you a lot of good perspective that everybody had to start somewhere, from one store to one product to one customer and so forth. But it really kind of brings things to perspective and to life. Because a lot of us know these big companies as these massively giant brands with really no personal interaction, because a lot of the times they just scale so much that there's just none of that personal touch to it. So this is a cool way to learn the stories and kind of pick up on some of the lessons learned. Highly recommend it. It's called How I Built This. Another one that I like, which is a little more techie and a little more startup-y, and maybe a little too much if you're just in the early stages, but it's called This Week in Startups. It's by Jason Calacanis, who's a really famous investor. He did some entrepreneurship in the past, but lately he's just been focusing on kind of investing. He brings some of the most interesting founders and just people in the tech space. Highly recommend it. It's a little more technical, not as much storytelling as How I Built This, but more kind of looking at different topics, different companies, and diving in. But regardless, super awesome. It's called This Week in Startups. And then I will recommend a third one. Let's see what else we got. Okay, so a third one, another cool one. It's called Masters of Scale. It's by the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. Also brings in some really, successful founders, from obviously Mark Zuckerberg to the founder of Airbnb, Brian Chesky, and also just talks to them about their journey, talks to them about how they would do things differently if they were to start again. So a very similar approach to How I Built This, which was the first podcast that I recommended. So highly recommend you do it. Reid Hoffman is a super smart dude, and obviously he built LinkedIn and sold it for a lot of money. And so Masters of Scale is the third one. And I will just recap How I Built This Week in Startups, and Masters of Scale are three of my kind of favorite podcasts, which I highly recommend you guys tune in. And, even if it's just one episode a week, I think you'll feel pretty good, and I'm sure you'll be hooked in no time. Thank you guys for watching. As always, we are almost at the finish line, feeling great, not really feeling too intimidated or in my head anymore. So it's been a nice experiment. Highly recommend you guys do it as well. And I will see you tomorrow. Thanks again for watching if you stuck around this long. And have an amazing, safe weekend, guys. Bye-bye.